In March, the thieves of Ningchuan, Hong Jingxi, were arrested. Ningchuan can only be regarded as a second-tier city in China, with relatively backward economic development and no well-known tourist attractions, but since the King of Thieves was born in the late 1990s, Ningchuan's name as the capital of thieves has been established. It can be said that with Ningchuan city as the center, 3 provinces are divided out. Hundreds of cities and even counties were stolen by the disciples and Sun Hong brought out by Hong Jingxi. Not to mention the white roads, even the underworld would not want to provoke this thief. The title of King of Thieves alone has been published in newspapers no less than 10 times in recent years. But to tell the truth, Hong Jingxi is a thief, but he is a very pursued thief. If you don't do small deals, almost all big deals can be done by him personally. The richest person in Ningchuan City is Mr. Lin Rushan. He is a commercial giant that emerged in the 1980s and a well-known antique collector in China. It is no exaggeration to say that the total value of the antiques stored in his vault can buy a quarter of Ningchuan City. These shockingly valuable antique collections are all hidden by Lin Rushan in a private vault under the villa in the suburbs. It was built by Lin Rushan when he was young. In recent years, he has been continuously improving with modern technology. The safety factor is comparable to that of the National Treasury. There is no possibility of being stolen. But even such a high-end vault could not stop the King of Thieves. In 1998, the vault under the Lin's villa was stolen, and a total of more than 60 pieces of cultural relics were stolen. Among them, the most valuable cultural relic is the Kaibao golden fallen swallow Buddha of the Tang dynasty. It is said that Lin Rushan was in Hong Kong in 1990. The photographed collection is currently valued at least 300 million yuan. After the news about the theft of the Lin family was exposed, the title of King of Thieves in Ningchuan was completely famous in China, and more people learned of the name of King of Thieves, Hong Jingxi. In fact, Hong Jingxi's most famous hard skills are 3 fast shots, fast unlocking, and 1 running fast. These skills can also be regarded as his ability to settle down. One of the biggest headaches for the police is his second skill, unlocking. The speed at which the King of Thieves unlocks is absolutely unscientific. It can be seen from the surveillance video provided by the Lin family that even the 5 doors failed to prevent him. Regardless of the type of lock, it could not last for 2 seconds under his hands. You know, the Lin family's vault is comparable to that of a major bank. Password locks and fingerprint locks are all available, but the thief can open them in less than 2 seconds. Is this scientific? For a person who knows the password, it takes about 10 seconds to open the lock, which is only 5 seconds faster, but what if you don't know the password? At the end of 1998, the Kaibao Liujian Luoyan Buddha stolen by Hong Jingxi appeared in the United Kingdom and was taken away by a wealthy businessman at a high price. The surveillance video provided by the Lin family was also sent to the Fortanin city, causing an uproar. The leaders were not shocked by Hong Jingxi's appalling stealing technique, but they discovered that Hong Jingxi had a thing in his hands that shouldn't have appeared. I have to say that Hong Jingxi is a very capable thief. In the next few years, despite the police chasing and intercepting him, under the arrangement of the superiors of Sichuan, the old thief has never been caught. Gradually, the King of Thieves began to silence his voice, as if the golden basin had washed his hands, and never committed another crime. But no one would have thought that today, nearly 20 years later, he will become a guest of the police. The outside world felt that he was arrested, but the insiders knew that he came in by himself. On March 10, Hong Jingxi was taken into the interrogation room for the second time. The person in charge of the interrogation, Zhao Meng, sat aside, with a cigarette in his hand, but he didn't light it, and stared at this unbelievable fat man. 53 years old, Des Hong has a height of less than 1.75 meters and a weight of more than 170 kilograms. How did someone who couldn't be found after being thrown into the crowd became the King of Thieves? Are you sick? Hong Jingxi frowned and looked at the interrogators around him with a very unhappy expression. I have said it all. I have found the prodigal in my conscience to turn his head back. You have to ask how many times to believe it. It's not that I don't believe it, I just don't understand. Zhao Meng frowned, looking like a knife, as if to peel off Hong Jingxi's disguise layer by layer. Hearing this, Hong Jin laughed, but was not angry because Zhao Meng scolded himself as a scumbag. I'm the prodigal son turning his head back, there is no other reason. Hong Jin smiled, eyes squinted, and a kind of complacency filled his face full of fleshy flesh. Since I surrendered, I should have been lightened? Wouldn't I be shot? When he asked this, anyone could hear the self-trust in that tone. It may not be killed, but at least indefinitely. Zhao Meng sneered. When he got the answer, Hong Jingxi nodded his head in satisfaction, indefinitely. After that, Hong Jingxi raised his eyes, swept left and right, and said with a smile, "Let me go back if nothing happened. I was so sleepy that I didn't sleep for the whole night just to go back to catch up." No. Zhao Meng lit the cigarette and smoked slowly, "It's not over yet. What else do you want to ask?" Hong Jingxi frowned and looked at him impatiently. "It's not that we arraigned you today, but the superior arranged for someone to come over." As Zhao Meng said, he moved the lamp on the table aside, leaned forward and took a close look at Hong Jingxi's face. "He wants to see you, saying he wants to take something from you." Hong Jingxi, who had never taken these interrogators seriously, seemed to realize something after hearing what Zhao Meng said, and his expression became obviously stiff. But before he could say anything, the door of the interrogation room was pushed open. The first two police officers walked in, followed by a fat man in his 40s in plain clothes. His body is similar to Hong Jingxi, but he wears a pair of gold glasses on his face, and his smile is indescribably cordial. "King of Thieves?" he asked. Hong Jingxi was stunned, thinking about whether or not to nod his head. Hearing a muffled sound, Hong Jin was too late to react, and the fat man put his head on the table. "When we meet for the first time, let me introduce myself. My surname is Huo." After holding down Hong Jingxi, the fat man smiled undiminished, and greeted the others politely. He took out his ID from his pocket, as if he knew Zhao Meng, and handed it directly to him. After receiving a look in his hand, Zhao Meng was stunned for a moment, looked at the fat man with the surname Huo in surprise, and then cautiously handed the documents back. "I want to talk to him alone." Huo Fatty smiled, "I would like to ask you to avoid it." If you didn't see Fatty Huo's certificate, maybe Zhao Meng would like to ask a few more questions, but now, Zhao Meng felt that this matter was more complicated than he thought, and the less he knew, the better. Until everyone left the interrogation room, Fatty Huo didn't let go of Hong Jingxi, still pressing his head and slowly working hard. Hong Jingxi sneered and didn't beg for mercy. He seemed to want to carry it through. In Ningchuan City, and even in the surrounding provinces, Hong Jingxi belonged to the kind of black and white character. If he didn't have the ability, could he live to this day? "Fight, grandson," Hong Jin said with a smile. Fatty Huo gave a hum, and only said one word. "Good." As soon as he finished speaking, Huo Fatty pressed his hands hard, and Hong Jingxi couldn't stop his nosebleeds. Only then did Hong Jingxi realize that Fatty Huo's hand strength was not right. It was simply not human strength, just like a mechanical hydraulic press. Although Fatty Huo's hands were slow to put on force, the feeling that the cheekbones seemed to be slowly squeezed into pieces was indeed not something Hong Jingxi could bear. Time passed by every minute and every second. The sound like bones being squeezed and deformed gradually reverberated in the interrogation room. "Stop! I think it's okay." Hearing Hong Jingxi's screams, Fatty Huo still had the kind of warm smile, his eyes were like an old friend looking at him. He reached out and picked up the table lamp on the table, hitting the back of Hong Jingxi's head. After doing all this, Huo Fatty looked at the blood on the thief king's head, nodded in satisfaction, and then asked him, "Where's the key?" Hong Jingxi is a standard bastard. It is his creed of life that he is not afraid of the sky, but now he understands it, and if he keeps his mouth on, the creed has to become an epitaph. This fat guy really wants to play him to death. What key? Hong Jingxi asked rhetorically, pretending to be puzzled. His tone of voice had obviously softened. What do you mean? Fatty Huo smiled, picked up the lamp to shine his head and gave it again. It was heavier than before. He almost rolled Hong Jingxi's eyes, but he still smiled and asked with a smile. If you don't have the key, how can you open the door with thousands of families? You opened the tightly protected Lin family vault? You don't rely on the key to open the door by your mind, don't you? Speaking of this, Fatty Huo put down the lamp, flicked Hong Jingxi's arm sideways, and threw him into the corner of the interrogation room like trash. In 1973, 5 keys were unearthed in Ma Wangdui, but one was accidentally lost when transporting to the capital. Fatty Huo took out a box of Panda cigarettes from his pocket and slowly moved to the place. As usual, chatting with Hong Jingxi with a smile, I'm actually quite curious, how did that key fall into your hands? What key? I don't even understand what you are talking about. Hong Jingxi slumped in the corner with a panic on his face, wiping the blood on his head while avoiding Fatty Huo's gaze. Fatty Huo took out 2 photos from his pocket and placed them gently in front of Hong Jingxi. A photo was taken from the surveillance video. The image was clear and full of colors. The date in the lower right corner of the photo corresponds to the date when Hong Jingxi stolen the Lin's vault. The other photo is much more blurred, and the date is more distant, with 5 metal keys-shaped utensils on it. Fatty Huo smoking a cigarette, sitting on a chair with Erlang's legs tilted, and looking at Hong Jingxi sideways. You may not know the origin of the key, but you must know its function. I don't want to ask you anything else, so just tell me where the key is. After seeing the 2 photos, Hong Jingxi looked totally lost, his eyes were extremely contradictory, as if he was engaged in a psychological struggle. After 2 minutes, Hong Jingxi spoke. The key is lost. Hearing this, Huo didn't say much, and directly smashed the lamp on the table. You say it again. Huo Fatty stared at Hong Jingxi with a smile. Hong Jingxi was beaten to blood by the lamp, and seemed to be in a trance. He sprang up like crazy and shouted at Fat Huo, "Do you think I lost the key on purpose?" Fatty Huo didn't say a word, and looked at him without saying a word. If a person's eyes are as sharp as a blade, then Fatty Huo's eyes are definitely a scraper. Like a real scraper, it can scrape off the camouflage on the opponent's body layer by layer. Being stared at by him, Hong Jingxi also felt that his back was hairy, and slowly calmed down, sitting cross-legged on the ground with a dejected expression. I came in for refuge." Hearing Hong Jingxi's words, Huo Fatty changed his expression for the first time and frowned. "Refuge? A week ago, my son didn't know where to find out the news, saying that Wushan Mental Hospital bought a batch of gold bricks from other provinces. The mental hospital buys gold bricks." Fatty Huo looked at Hong Jingxi suspiciously. What do they do if they don't buy medical supplies and buy gold bricks? Hong Jin said with joy, "I wonder, besides, what kind of mental hospital can be so rich and buy a car of gold bricks?" With that said, Hong Jingxi asked Fatty Huo for a cigarette. "How many gold bricks are there?" Fatty Huo asked curiously, and kindly helped Hong Jingxi light a cigarette. Hong Jingxi said, 1 ton. "Are you going to kick me?" Fatty Huo frowned. "A ton of gold bricks? Are you sure you are right?" Hong Jingxi shook his head, and his body was trembling when he was smoking. He didn't know if he was afraid of being beaten by Fatty Huo or thinking of something that scared him. His eyes became trance. "A ton of gold bricks, that's not a joke. The hospital is not a bank vault. It doesn't take much time to steal it. Originally, I stopped washing my hands, but this, I am indeed greedy." According to Hong Jingxi, his son checked the exact number of bricks and the date when they were sent to the mental hospital. In order to avoid accidents, he deliberately asked to go out on his own and take someone with him to do this. Your son is also a thief? Fatty Huo asked curiously. The dragon gives birth to the dragon, and the phoenix gives birth to the phoenix. Hong Jingxi said. Fatty Huo snorted, you just said that the upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked, and you put gold on your face. My son is not bad, he has a good foundation, and has a high level of savvy. He didn't make a name for himself on the white road. I kept him secret. I was planning to pass the key to him in a few years. But who knows it will change. In this way. Faulted. Huo Fatty asked curiously. Hong Jingxi did not say a word, lowered his head, his body trembling constantly. After a while, Hong Jingxi said with a hoarse voice, I missed, but it's not just a miss. Fatty Huo was stunned, and asked what did he mean? My son, and my 3 apprentices. When talking about this, Hong Jingxi trembled more and more violently, his face turned pale, it was obviously a sequelae of being greatly frightened. They were eaten. Hong Jingxi was helped by Huo Fatty and sat back, and all the cigarettes on his body were taken out and placed in front of Hong Jingxi. Fatty Huo has tried a lot of prisoners. He can see that Hong Jingxi is not lying, although the content of what he said is weird. Lu Li, whoever listens to it will think it is nonsense. Tell me in detail from beginning to end. Fatty Huo sat beside Hong Jingxi, staring at Hong Jingxi's face intently, trying to find some answers from the expression on his face. Hong Jingxi also didn't look away, picked up the cigarette for himself, took a few mouthfuls in silence, and became calmer. It went smoothly at the beginning. It's easier to sneak into a mental hospital than to enter a bank vault. Hong Jingxi said, drew a few virtual pictures on the table with his fingers. We went in at 2 o'clock in the night. Lots, although there is no map, but after a stroll in, you can almost get it through. According to Hong Jingxi, the security measures in the Wuhan mental hospital are very general. For them, they can basically come and go as they please, but they only found out that the place was a back-shaped building after a stroll inside. The entrance and the lobby are on the south, the north is the inpatient department, and the remaining 2 sides are the medical rooms and so on. In the middle of the word Hui, there is not an open space for the patients, but a small empty hall, and a separate building that is completely sealed off. The building had only 1 floor, about the size of a basketball court, but the walls were covered with silver-white reflective tin foil. There were no windows and only 1 door could enter. After the people who transported the gold bricks entered the mental hospital, they first joined the dean's room, and then pushed the trolley to deliver the gold bricks to the hut in turn. I also wondered at the time. I guess it should be the vault of the mental hospital. Hong Jingxi murmured, it's in the middle of the answer, it's quite large, and it's similar to the patio, those in the main building. The corridors, the inpatient rooms, the offices and the windows in those places are all facing the outside of the hospital, and no one can see them. Then how do you know about this building? Huo Fatty asked curiously, following the past all the way. We are on the rooftop. Hong Jingxi shook his head. I didn't find that place at the beginning. The rooftop is a hole. It was sealed and there is no clue, but I found that there are holes in the rooftop in the middle of the words, like the breathable one is as big as a ping-pong ball, there are more than a dozen. With that said, Hong Jin was overjoyed for a while, and denied what he had said before. It may not be breathable. Hong Jingxi suddenly remembered something. How do you say? Huo Fatty asked. The holes are in groups of 3, arranged in a triangle, the left and right are blocked, only one is connected. Hong Jingxi muttered, the 2 blocked holes are filled with crystals, the broken ones looks very similar to rhinestones. Hearing this, Huo Fatty was lost. What does that mental hospital do? Fatty Huo couldn't help asking. It's the kind of nursing home that cares for mental illness. It is not well known in the local area. There are several larger than it. Hong Jingxi took a cigarette and said slowly. Some wandering people with sick brains. Mental hospital. Fatty Huo was taken aback. I know a lot of mental hospitals, but none of them are like this. That's not where people stay. Hong Jingxi said, interrupting Fatty Huo. Hong Jingxi squeezed out the cigarette in his hand, and then lit the second cigarette. His face was full of fear of memories. His voice was trembling uncontrollably, but he could hear that his thinking logic was not messed up. Not to the point of being delirious. If you want to enter the empty hall, you must enter from the corridor behind the dean's room. There are 4 security guards guarding it. This is the first time I saw a mental hospital security guard carrying a gun. What gun? Huo Fatty asked. The regular 54 Black Star pistols are not the native goods that are made casually. Hearing this, Huo Fatty couldn't help frowning. Thermal weapons such as guns are absolutely prohibited in the country. Except for regular units that have the ability to equip guns, the rest, let alone mental hospitals, not even provincial hospitals. Fortunately, we were prepared. When Hong Jingxi said this, his expression was a little smug. I have an apprentice who is in medicine. The craftsmanship of the needle, that's a thing. With 4 people, 4 anesthesia guns, and their familiar operation, the 4 security guards didn't even have a chance to react, and they were brought down. The door has a code lock. If there is no key, I will have a headache. Hong Jingxi sighed. After opening the door, we went in, thinking of a quick fix. Even if we can't take all the gold bricks, we have to do as much. Take away a badge. Behind the door is the empty courtyard of the mental hospital, and the independent building is inside. Across the door, the ground also changed. It was not floor tiles, but countless glass shards. Each grain is the size of a soybean, without lumps. There are no windows on the surrounding walls, only 4 scattered lights, orange-yellow, looking very dim. As soon as we walked in, the entrance door was closed. Hong Jingxi said, his body trembling slightly, and the emotions that had calmed down before were also a little uncontrollable. A doctor in a white coat stood inside and looked at us with a smile, as if he had known that we would come. Before we could react, he passed out. When Hong Jingxi woke up, he had been tied to a chair. The location he was in was like a restaurant, with a long table in the middle, a few people in hospital gowns, and 6 doctors, sitting around the table in a circle. I was the only one when I woke up. Several of my apprentices, my son is gone. Hong Jingxi said tremblingly, his face pale, I want to ask the whereabouts of other people. But I can't speak, my throat seems to be blocked, I can't make a sound at all. Everything that followed made Hong Jingxi feel like he had a nightmare. The doctors and patients didn't care if Hong Jingxi woke up and talked quietly to himself, but they couldn't hear what they were talking about. Anyway, everyone was laughing and joking, as if there was something particularly happy about it. After a while, a man wearing a chef's hat came in with a dining trolley. There is a large pot with a lid, and a few large plates covered with a metal cover. The cooking pot is so big that even if the lid is not opened, Hong Jingxi can smell the scent of stewed meat inside. The thick aroma is slightly pungent, but the strange taste makes people salivate. Hong Jingxi had been hungry all night, and when he smelled the smell of the meat in the pot, his stomach was already screaming. The doctors around did not abuse Hong Jingxi, but instead helped him untie his right hand and enthusiastically handed him the table and chopsticks, while the chef personally filled him with a bowl of broth. The broth has a strong smell, but it can't hide the refreshing smell. The soup is thick, and it feels refreshing after every sip. It was the first time Hong Jingxi found out that he could eat so much. In that extremely strange atmosphere, he seemed to have lost his reason and the ability to think, drinking the broth frantically, eating the stewed bones and rotten meat in the bowl. He didn't realize what he had eaten until he found 2 finger bones at the bottom of the bowl. After listening to Hong Jingxi's narration, Huo Fatty didn't say a word. He looked directly into Hong Jingxi's eyes and silently distinguished the truth from these words. Although he had seen a lot of weird things, he couldn't imagine the situation like Hong Jingxi said. Hong Jingxi was smoking a cigarette and his eyes became more tranced. I vomited up everything I ate, and my stomach acid turned back. I really wanted to die at the time, but I was afraid of death. I didn't want to become something in the pot. Hong Jin muttered with joy, his body trembling constantly. At that time, a person wearing a mask walked in and said that for the sake of the key, he let me go for the time being and let me come first. He said that as long as I was outside, I would definitely die. Go to jail and they won't kill me. Then you ran to surrender. Fatty Huo looked at Hong Jingxi suspiciously. I don't think you are such a persuasive person. Your son was killed by someone, so you still listen to them and surrender yourself. No, you don't know. He took me to a room, saw a few monsters, they are here. Hong Jingxi screamed without warning, as if he had seen something terrible, fell off the chair, and kept moving back. Didn't you say you want to let me go? I followed your requirements. You let me go. Hong Jingxi's eyes were already full of fear, his eyes staying on the door of the interrogation room, and the stern begging for mercy continued to echo in the room. Even Fatty Huo was startled by his abrupt changes. Don't be afraid, there is only me here. Fatty Huo stepped forward and comforted Hong Jingxi in a soft voice, you are safe now, no one will find you. Hong Jingxi was silent at this moment, as if being pinched by someone. There was a gurgling sound in his throat, and his pupils were enlarged to the limit of human beings. At that moment, Fatty Huo could see clearly that there was a reflection in Hong Jingxi's eyes. In addition to his own reflection, there seemed to be 3 people behind him. Fatty Huo's scalp exploded in an instant, and his whole body was erected. He almost subconsciously drew out the gun he carried and turned to look at him. But there was nothing behind him. In the dim interrogation room, only himself and Hong Jingxi. When he breathed a sigh of relief and slowly turned back, he realized that Hong Jingxi was silent. Fatty Huo was taken aback for a moment, then gritted his teeth and took a look at Hong Jingxi's eyelids. What the is it? This old boy was scared to death. Hong Jingxi had no breathing, his heartbeat stopped, his eyes and pupils were dilated, and he couldn't die anymore. It was certain that Hong Jin was overjoyed and Fatty Huo also had a headache. He had never expected such a situation to happen. If Hong Jingxi didn't lie and everything he said was true, then this matter would become troublesome. That psychiatric hospital was definitely not an ordinary psychiatric hospital, and seeing what that meant, they also knew about the key, and they might even know that the key belonged to Hong Jingxi, who was deliberately led to him. For registered felons like Hong Jingxi, as long as they are caught, they will definitely spit out those things, but we do not choose to kill? What is the purpose of those people? Fatty Huo couldn't think of it, and felt a terrible headache. This key is really a curse, it attracts so many ghosts and monsters at first sight. Huo Fatty sighed, then got up and pushed the door out, said hello to the people outside, then turned and left the city bureau. Before Hong Jingxi died, Huo Fatty could be sure that he was right. There are a total of 4 people in the reflection of Hong Jingxi's eyes. The door of the interrogation room is on the far left. It is a very intuitive position that can be seen at a glance. Someone will inevitably be found in the middle of the way. So besides himself, who are the other 3 people in Hong Jingxi's eyes? It's not a human being, is it possible? Fatty Huo felt a little headache, but after thinking about it, he took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The phone was connected quickly and didn't speak, waiting for Fatty Huo to speak first. Lao Zhou, the case is a bit complicated and may be an abnormal case. As he spoke, Fatty Huo raised his chubby hand and buttoned his nose with radish-like fingers. It's not my strong point to handle this kind of case. If you send someone over, I'm afraid I can't stand it alone. Wait a minute, let me see. There was an old man over there, speaking hoarsely, and he could still hear the sound of turning the paper in a vague manner. After the meeting, the old man said to Fatty Huo, there is no one in the province. If you have to transfer people, it will be the day after tomorrow. The tasks are heavy these days, and many people have been sent to Kinling. I'm a little anxious, can't I think of a solution? Fatty Huo frowned, looking a little anxious. If something goes wrong in this matter, the higher level sanctions will be light, but that is the key unearthed in Ma Wangdui. In the eyes of the higher level, it is more national treasure than a national treasure. Is it still a problem? The old man on the phone also knew the severity, thought for a while, and said, Ning Chuan does not have our branch, only a registered senior temporary worker. Our original case was outsourced to him, or I would call him over. Help! Who? Is it reliable? Fatty Huo pressed his throat and asked in a low voice. Reliable, I have read his information. This kid is very young, but he is indeed a capable person. The old man on the phone said, the most important thing is that the foundation is clean and the soles of the feet are not dusty. Outsourcing, don't you think? Fatty Huo thought for a while and thought it was fine. He would definitely not say anything about the key, as long as he kept his mouth tight, there shouldn't be anything wrong. What is his name? Chen Xian. The old alley in the afternoon is always favored by the sunshine in spring. The light passed through the narrow and cramped space on the top of the alley, and silently spread on the green bricks, revealing a lazy and comfortable charm. The blue brick laneway with a strong historical atmosphere cannot withstand the lapse of time. It is slicked and reflected by people walking by, and it even emits a strange halo in the sun, which looks hazy and illusory. In the depths of the old alley, there is an antique blue brick courtyard. The yard is full of green bricks, the eaves are still dripping with the spring rain left by last night, and a bamboo-woven lounge chair beloved by the elderly is placed in the corner. Chen Xian lay on the bamboo chair and had a sound nap, enjoying this rare comfort. Is Mr. Chen there? A sudden knock on the door broke the silence in the courtyard. Chen Xian rubbed his eyes sleepily, yawned and sat up, got up and went to open the door. You are? Standing outside the door was a strange fat man with a friendly smile on his face. My surname is Huo, I am looking for Mr. Chen Xian. I am, what do you want me to do? Chen Xian nodded. Fatty Huo was stunned obviously, his expression was a little unbelievable. He looked at Chen Xian carefully, and there was a little doubt in his eyes. Are you Chen Xian? This alley is my family's surname Chen. Chen Xian said. Then what? I may have found the wrong thing. Huo Fatty smiled embarrassedly and turned around to leave. Huo Fatty's reaction was no surprise to Chen Xian. After all, he had just graduated from Ningchuan University this year, and for those who came to him for work, he really seemed a little tender. Uncle, are you looking for something to do with me? Fatty Huo didn't say a word, his expression was very tangled. Chen Xian leaned forward slightly, sniffed Huo Fatty's body carefully, and asked curiously, you have a deadly smell on your body. It's quite fresh. Have you seen any dirty things? Someone introduced you. Find me. Hearing this, Fatty Huo looked at Chen Xian in surprise and asked, can you smell it? Come in first. Chen Xian did not answer Huo Fatty's question, but politely invited Huo Fatty in. The quaint yard was neatly organized by the owner, and the most conspicuous one was the century-old locust tree planted in the corner of the yard. As soon as the wind blows, the leaves will rattle, and the sun shines through the gaps in the canopy, making the entire yard a lazy smell. Chen Xian introduced Fatty Huo into the living room, walked aside and poured water on him, talking. I don't have a few friends in Ningchuan. People who can call me by name are almost always to find me for errands. Are you a private job introduced by someone else, or are you, official? Hearing that, Fatty Huo hesitated a little, then replied, I am the one who keeps the secret bureau. The guardian? Chen Xian paused for a while pouring tea, and couldn't help but look at the fat man a few more times before serving the hot tea to him. Tell me about the case. Chen Xian sat on the chair opposite him, his face full of curiosity. Fatty Huo nodded, took a sip while holding the shelf, but wanted to vomit it in the next second. Damn overnight tea! The content of this case is more complicated, and the level of confidentiality is high, so whether you accept the case or not, all information about this case must be kept confidential. Fatty Huo put down his teacup and didn't plan to drink any more. His tone of speech became serious. Hearing him say this, Chen Xian didn't say much, and nodded quietly. Hong Jingxi, the thief king of Ningchuan City, you a local should have heard of him. I know, I have seen his report on TV, but I haven't seen him. Chen Xian smiled. Fatty Huo nodded dully, and said slowly, he stole a national treasure. National treasure? Chen Xian was stunned for a moment, but was not surprised. Over the years, under the exaggeration of the Ningchuan city media, Hong Jingxi was almost a thief in the eyes of the public. Even the wealthy Lin had been moved by him, and he really didn't know what he couldn't steal. What kind of national treasure? Chen Xian asked curiously. Fatty Huo took a deep look at Chen Xian, and then said, a bronze key. Seeing that he didn't want to say more, Chen Xian didn't ask any more, and continued to wait for his next words. The key was in our hands at first, but it was later lost due to an accident. It was not until 1998 that we got a tip saying that the key was in Hong Jingxi's hands. Fatty Huo sighed with a face. Tired, we've been looking for him for 21 years. When Fatty Huo said this, he was mellow and vocal, and he was voicing what he said from the bottom of his heart. When others heard it, he would feel full of emotion, but Chen Xian just nodded. Then what? Fatty Huo was silent for a few seconds before he said, he surrendered himself to the police station. After preliminary interrogation, we got a lot of useful information. Hong Jingxi surrendered was threatened, and the group who threatened him has taken the key away. According to Hong Jingxi's account to us, those people are a bit strange, they cannibalize. Hearing this, Chen Xian's movement of drinking tea paused a bit, the expression on his face rarely changed. Are you sure they cannibalize? Chen Xian asked. Not sure, so I will come to you. Huo Fatty replied. Strictly speaking, Chen Xian and Huo Fatty belong to the same department, and they are both under the detection department of the Secret Bureau. Although Chen Xian is only a temporary worker, he has to come forward if internal employees are uncertain when handling certain special cases. The same is true in this case. Can you smoke here? Huo Fatty asked. Chen Xian nodded, and took out the ashtray from the coffee table to him. It's okay, let's smoke. After lighting the cigarette, Huo Fatty took a few sips, and his mental state was a little better, and the fatigue in his eyes was also dispelled by the nicotine a lot. During the interrogation, Hong Jin died with joy. According to my preliminary judgment, it should be a myocardial infarction. He was frightened to death. Fatty Huo was smoking a cigarette while recalling the scenes that appeared in the interrogation room before. It seems that he saw something strange before he died. Something dirty. Chen Xian thought for a while, and asked tentatively, is it a spirit body? I don't know. Huo Fatty shook his head and said, I was the only person in the interrogation room except him, but I did see 3 other figures in the reflection of his eyes, maybe they were spirits. Death is not the true end for humans or other creatures. After death, consciousness and spiritual energy will leave the physical body and continue to live in another state. This state should be a non-material special energy body in scientific terms, but it is actually the so-called soul, which is also called in the industry. For the spirit body. If Hong Jingxi's death was related to these spirit bodies, or even directly caused by them, then it is certain that there is a huge difference between them and ordinary spirit bodies. Because ordinary spirit bodies can't kill people, and they leave after the first 7, so they won't stay in the Yang world. Chen Xian thought without saying a word, lowered his head slightly, looking at the teacup in his hand in a daze. Do you need me to help you find out the cause of Hong Jingxi's death? Chen Xian asked. Fatty Huo shook his head and said that he didn't need to. There was a special person inside to do it. In this case, Hong Jingxi was a trivial existence, and the most important thing was the key. The one who threatened him to surrender was the one who took the key. Who are they? Chen Xian asked curiously. Do you know the Wushan mental hospital? Huo Fatty asked. It's the one on the outskirts of your city next to Wushan. Chen Xian recalled for a while, and said he didn't know, he hadn't heard of it. That mental hospital bought a batch of gold bricks some time ago, probably 1 ton. Huo Fatty said, because of this, they were targeted by Hong Jingxi. A ton of gold bricks? Chen Xian couldn't believe it. What kind of mental hospital could have such a big hand? That night, Hong Jingxi and his gang sneaked into this mental hospital, intending to quietly transport the gold bricks away, but they were all planted. As Fatty Huo said, he couldn't help but shook his head. Except for Hong Jingxi, the others were killed by the doctors in the mental hospital, and they seemed to have been eaten. Huo Fatty smoked with a calm face and frowned. Hong Jingxi is the only one who lives, and it is also they deliberately. They let it out, saying that they won't kill him if they look at the key, but I don't understand, are they not afraid of being exposed? Chen Xian took a sip of tea without speaking. This mission may be a bit dangerous, you. Fatty Huo glanced at Chen Xian and felt a little drumming in his heart. Although he knew that in this special case, the contact person, Lao Zhou, would not arbitrarily give him temporary workers, and those who had no skill would not be able to get into Lao Zhou's eyes, but, is this temporary worker a bit younger? How old are you? Fatty Huo couldn't help asking. 23. Chen Xian replied. Fatty Huo's hand holding the cigarette shivered, looking at Chen Xian's gaze a little surprised. In their department, there are nearly 1,000 certified temporary workers. These temporary workers are of different ages, ranging from 80 to 90-year-old fathers to 17-18-year-old juniors. However, temporary workers are also divided into titles, including senior, intermediate, and low level. These 3 distinct professional titles represent their personal abilities. They also mean that their salary and benefits are different, and the cases that they can access are also different. If I remember correctly, Lao Zhou called before and said that the registered Chen Xian is a senior temporary worker? Are there any senior temporary workers so young? I remember the few senior temporary workers I had seen before, the youngest one had to be in his 40s. Although Fatty Huo thought so, he also knew very well that the department never raises waste. Since Chen Xian can get the senior title of temporary worker, it naturally shows that he has this ability. Thinking about it, there is only that possibility. Xiao Chen, are you a stranger? Hearing this question, Chen Xian glanced at Fatty Huo and smiled. If I'm not a stranger, this case can't be arranged with me, right? Fatty Huo laughed mockingly, feeling that his question was a bit redundant. The concept of aliens was first proposed by Huo Fatty and his department in the 1980s, and specifically refers to those who have special abilities that are different from ordinary people. Simply put, it is a person with a special function. Under the influence of science in recent years, special functions have been denounced as metaphysics, and some have even become the subject of science fiction, causing ordinary people to have long lost the ability to distinguish true from false. But what the truth is, only a handful of people know the truth. The Qigong craze in the 1980s in history was just a carnival feast of falsehoods and lies for modern people. That era was full of swindlers and fake masters, but it is undeniable that that era full of farce also produced many strangers. The 507 institutes established by the country were used to study these aliens in the 1980s. The official statement is to study human science and supernatural phenomena and to carry out a scientific revolution, but over time, this institute also faded out of everyone's vision. Qigong fever has also become a grand farce. Until now, many people are also curious, do supernatural functions really exist? In particular, some people often have this question after watching the American comic film, but they will soon get the answer from their own hearts. It is impossible to exist. Movies, comics, and novels are all fictional, and reality is not so sci-fi. But what about the facts? Foreign people are not as exaggerated as they are in the movies, but they do exist and are inseparable from the real world. Many people have even heard of such people. For example, Taoist priests, monks, feng shui masters, fortune tellers, disciples of horses, etc. Anyone who has real abilities, can use certain supernatural powers, or cause supernatural phenomena, can be called a foreigner. There are currently two types of foreigners in China. One is an acquired stranger who is born with no strangeness, and was born to be the most ordinary person, but through religious system practice, he has obtained certain supernatural powers. Most Taoist monks fall into this situation. The second type is inborn aliens, which are also extremely rare and can be treated specially by Fatty Huo and his department. They are born with supernatural abilities, and most of them will awaken before they reach adulthood. The abilities of each stranger are different. The most common ability is yin and yang. In scientific terms, yin and qi particles can be observed with the naked eye. Which is the so-called yin qi, so you can directly see the spirit body in the air. In addition to having unique abilities, innate aliens have a higher sensitivity to yin and yang particles. If they practice religious systems, their progress in practice will be more than 100 times faster than ordinary people. Because of this, the congenital aliens can be said to be delicious in the department. In Huo Fatty's department, there are only close to 100 people. And those temporary workers who get senior titles are almost all congenital aliens. You can be a senior temporary worker at such a young age. Are you a congenital stranger? Fatty Huo scanned back and forth in the living room, but didn't see any clues. There were no tablets dedicated to the ancestors or gods, and it was as clean as an ordinary person. Which vein do you practice? Fatty Huo asked. Whether it is congenital or acquired, foreigners need to practice to increase their own strength. After all, supernatural powers are not a panacea, and in many cases they are not necessarily needed. It's not in any vein. Chen Xian smiled and touched his nose. I'll say yes first. I don't know how to tell fortune-telling and look at feng shui. Live. Only pick up those dirty things. Fatty Huo was startled, and asked questioningly, which school do you come from? No school, no school. Fatty Huo thought for a while, and tentatively asked, Hey. Self-taught, Chen Xian said with a smile. Fug. Fatty Huo was blocked back and held back, as if being pinched around his neck, his face flushed, and he said for a long time. You are awesome. Chen Xian just smiled shyly, his youthful and innocent appearance made Fatty Huo amused. How can you teach yourself by packing those things? Fatty Huo asked humorously, asking him like a child, with a rare smile on his face, how do you pack them? Hearing this question, Chen Xian answered without hesitation. Swear when you meet, beat when you catch, or eat it if you don't listen. Fatty Huo was silent for 2 seconds and asked cautiously, Are you sure we are talking about the same thing? Chen Xian did not say anything, but nodded affirmatively. Have you eaten them? Fatty Huo was more careful when he asked. Chen Xian smiled, revealing 2 rows of bright white teeth. The clean smile was strangely beautiful, but the next words he said made Fatty Huo a little nervous, which made the fatty feel a little nervous. I have eaten a lot, but most of them have no taste. Why not eat white rice? Seeing that Chen Xian didn't seem to be joking, Fatty Huo was also silent. After smoking the cigarette in his hand, Fatty Huo pinched out the cigarette and stood up and said. The mental hospital has been stared to death by our people. For the time being, there is no phenomenon of people escaping. You should go and see with me now. If what you said before was not a joke with me. When this case was handled you can only rely on you to protect me. Yes, bodyguard. Chen Xian was happy. Almost, anyway, you. Before Fatty Huo finished speaking, there was an old-fashioned cell phone ringing in his pocket. Fatty Huo took out the phone and glanced at it, then connected. What's the matter? Huo Fatty asked. On the phone, Fatty Huo's subordinate Zhang Dehai, this time he was solely responsible for the stalking operation in the mental hospital, and he was a small leader. Boss. Something happened here. Zhang Dehai's broken gong voice came through the phone, almost like a broken speaker specializing in heavy bass. Even Chen Xian, who was standing by, could hear it. The mental hospital caught fire. When Chen Xian followed Huo Fatty to the Wushan Psychiatric Hospital, the firefighters had already started firefighting, and the periphery of the psychiatric hospital was full of personnel from relevant departments who came to blockade the scene. Except for the firefighting units that passed special inspections, all others were not allowed to enter or leave. Why hasn't this fire been extinguished yet? Fatty Huo parked the car at a more conspicuous position on the side of the road, led Chen Xian out of the car, and asked as he walked towards the crowd, "Where are the firemen?" They went in. A big bald head squeezed out of the crowd. He was wearing a decent black suit and a gold ring on his right hand. He didn't look like an insider, but more like a nouveau riche. The big bald head hurriedly walked to Huo Fatty, and reported to him very carefully, "The firefighter went in to fight the fire 10 minutes ago, and is still working hard to put out the fire as soon as possible." This bald head is Zhang Dehai, the leader of the investigation team, and he was the person who called Fatty Huo before. After discovering a fire in the mental hospital, he immediately notified the local fire department to rush to the scene to fight the fire. However, the reality was more difficult than he thought. No matter how hard the firefighters tried to fight the fire still could not be effectively controlled. Intensified. The mental hospital is located on the outskirts of Ningchuan City, next to Wushan Mountain. As a mountainous area that has not been marked as a scenic spot, Wushan has a large area of virgin forest. If the fire is not controlled and invades this mountain forest, it will be a disaster that no one wants to see. How long does it take? Huo Fatty asked. It's hard to say, it's mainly because of the strong wind tonight, and the complex structure of this mental hospital is like a chimney. The fire rushed to the top as soon as it started. Zhang Dehai hurriedly explained, his voice was trembling, and he wiped the sweat from his head while explaining, his old face flushed with anxiety. Now the firefighting unit is still working hard, trying to control the fire as soon as possible. How did this fire start? Hearing this young voice, Zhang Dehai turned his face and took a look, only to find that there was a facetious young man standing next to his superior, and he was a little surprised. Although Zhang Dehai did not know Chen Xian, he still had a foresight and knew that this was the person who entered the scene with the superiors, so he answered without hesitation, "It seems that something has exploded because we are not inside, so the specific situation is not clear, but many people have heard the explosion." Explosion. Fatty Huo frowned, his expression becoming a bit ugly. Did the gang of turtle grandsons know that their affairs had been exposed and that this area was also completely targeted, so they blew up the hospital after 100? Uncle Huo, what do you think their purpose is? Chen Xian asked nonchalantly. Upon hearing this question, Fatty Huo frowned and said, "It's not certain yet." Chen Xian nodded lightly, and looked at the sea of fire not far away without saying a word. He seemed to be thinking about something, and the whole person looked a little surprised. Ningchuan is a city with relatively complete environmental protection, and there is no excessive industrial pollution, so I have never seen smog, and the night sky can often be seen after the spring rain season. There was no wind and rain this night, but it was destined to not be calm. The flames soaring to the sky are like a demon crawling out of hell, biting the remains of this hospital frantically. The blazing fire on his body almost illuminates the night sky of the southern suburbs. With the efforts of multiple departments, the fire was slowly brought under control. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the fire that had been burning for several hours finally came to an end. The mountains were filled with dense fog, the air became humid and sultry, and the ruined walls of the mental hospital were still warm, exuding a kind of burnt smell. Standing next to the ruins, Chen Xian sniffed for a while, and gradually distinguished a strange meaty smell from the burning smell of the hospital. It was the smell of human fat being roasted, which was stronger than the smell of barbecue in the night market. How many people died in this hospital? Too much lifeless. Compared to Chen Xian, who was standing aside with an okay person, Huo Fati was obviously a lot more busy, rushing around and handing over with other departments. When all irrelevant personnel were evacuated, only the people from Fatty Huo and his department were left outside the mental hospital. "Come in with me and have a look," Huo Fati said, and walked to Chen Xian's side and gave him a bottle of mineral water. Chen Xian took the water, unscrewed the lid and took 2 sips, nodded and said yes. "Boss, I will bring some people in with you," Zhang Dehai said. He is one of the people who knows the inside story of the case, and he is quite wary of this mental hospital. Fatty Huo snorted, and his expression became solemn when he spoke. "The outside blockade cannot be broken. Let people continue to stare at me, even a fly can't be released for me." When conducting fire-fighting operations in the fire-fighting unit, Fatty Huo repeatedly emphasized several times that he can only work outside and cannot enter the inside of the mental hospital. The reasons are also complicated, but the most important thing is to avoid unnecessary danger. What exactly is in the mental hospital? The answer to this question is still a question mark in Huo Fatty's heart. However, it is certain that there must be something in this seemingly ordinary mental hospital that cannot be explained by ordinary science. The death of Hong Jingxi is the best evidence. While Fatty Huo and the others were getting ready to go, Chen Xian also wandered around the ruins, as if looking for something. Every time he walked more than 10 meters, he would raise his head and look in the direction of the hospital. When Chen Xian came back from this circle, Huo Fatty and the others were ready to set off. Everyone put on a special vest made by the department, with an armed belt around their waist, and a pistol holster tied to their legs. Several of them were holding video recorders, as if they were going to record everything inside. It's not the first time Chen Xian has dealt with these people, so he knows the equipment on them quite well. The vest is a special bulletproof vest. There is a palm-sized metal plate in the interlayer of the fabric, which is printed with a certain Taoist talisman, which is just in the chest cavity of the vest, which can avoid the so-called spiritual possession of the vest owner. Firearms and bullets, military tactical daggers, these are special things. The bullet is a sandwich bullet, which is full of secret mineral powder that has been specially processed, and the military dagger is carved with a spell on the knife, which is said to be able to touch the spiritual body. Just by looking at it, Fatty Huo and the others were armed to their teeth this time, and a dozen people were stuck outside the gate of the mental hospital, waiting for Chen Xian to lead in. "What did you wonder about just now?" Huo Fatty asked. Chen Xian casually explained, "Count how many spirits there are in it." As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Xian touched his chin, his expression a little surprised. "But I walked around and didn't even see a shadow. Maybe they are in the hospital." Hearing Chen Xian's words, Huo couldn't help being silent for a while, and couldn't help asking, "How much do you think there is in it?" "There are as many spirit bodies as there are people who die." Chen Xian wrinkled his nose and sniffed a few times, his eyes flashed with heaviness, and said in a low voice, "There are not a few people who have died in this hospital. This is the first time I have met. Such a heavy death feels like a mass grave." After getting the answer from Chen Xian, Fatty Huo's reaction was good. After all, his qualifications are here, and he is calmer in situations, but other people's reactions are not so good. Almost everyone is becoming nervous. In any case, they are only investigators, and only participate in very rare cases, so there are not many cases where they face the spirit body directly. In the dark night, the hospital door looked at the indescribable crippled man, like a monster who chose to eat, opened a huge mouth exuding blood, waiting for the food to go in by itself. Inside the door is a deep and dark corridor. Even if you flash a flashlight outside the door to shine inside, you can't see it at a glance. Is there anything you want to say before you go in? Huo Fati said. He glanced at Chen Xian and reminded him, for example, what should I pay attention to inside, or what is the main focus of this action? Chen Xian asked again. Search. Huo Fati replied, the goal is that key. Then you follow me in, and other people don't go in. Chen Xian said, raising his hand and rubbing his nose. It seemed that the smell here was a bit irritating to him, and his eyes were slightly red. It's too dead here. Seriously, the number of spirit bodies may be more than I thought. If these people follow in, I can't protect them. Hearing this, Huo Fati thought carefully, then nodded in response. Seeing Huo Fati's agreement, the investigators present were relieved, but Zhang Dehai was a little worried, as if he was worried about letting the leader follow Chen Xian. Boss, can this work? Zhang Dehai asked hesitantly, giving Chen Xian a calm look, his eyes full of suspicion. Fatty Huo smiled and said it would work, but didn't explain so much. He seemed confident in Chen Xian. Don't worry, as long as I'm here, the spirit body won't be able to get close to Uncle Huo's body within 20 meters. Chen Xian took the initiative to speak, as a relief to Zhang Dehai. I have to say that in these words of Chen Xian, there is no exaggerated arrogance, nor too blind self-confidence. The calmness emanating from the inside out, like possessing a kind of calming magic power, makes everyone inexplicable. Relax a bit. Let's go in. After Chen Xian finished speaking, he crossed the darkened threshold and walked slowly into the hospital gate. The posture of strolling in the courtyard makes it impossible to see that he is here to handle the case. On the contrary, it looks like he is walking on the street, and he can't feel any nervousness. Boss, is he reliable? Zhang Dehai leaned over. Fatty Huo sighed, feeling a little helpless. Who knows, I hope he is a capable person, otherwise this time. Suddenly, there was a thunder in the sky. Fatty Huo stopped his voice, raised his head and glanced towards the sky. The slightly swollen eye sockets became a little deeper, and his eyes became heavy. Zhang Dehai was a wintry person, and he soon noticed the change in Huo Fatty's expression. Boss, what's the matter? Zhang Dehai asked cautiously. Fatty Huo took out a cigarette and lit one, then threw the cigarette case to Zhang Dehai and said, it's going to rain. What's wrong with the rain? Zhang Dehai didn't understand. Fatty Huo shook his head without further explanation, ran into the hospital with a flashlight, and followed Chen Xian a little hastily. It's raining, Huo Fatty asked in a low voice, is it going to go in and search now, will something happen? According to the scientific statement in the department, late night is the moment when the yin particles increase sharply, and rain is a natural substance that promotes yin particles. The two merged together, and when combined, so many people died in this hospital. No matter how ordinary a spirit body is, it may have the ability to hurt people. If you listen to me, nothing will happen. Chen Xian replied without looking back, his tone still calm. But in the next second, he suddenly stopped, and raised his hand to signal Fatty Huo to stop. What's wrong? Fatty Huo asked, instinctively raised the flashlight and took a shot into the corridor in front of him. This casual look made him startled with white hair and sweat. The corridor, which should have been empty, was full of people at this time. Those people seemed to be unstable, as if their brains were abnormal, their bodies swayed back and forth, and they kept hitting the wall with their heads, making very slight noises. The sound was very small at first. But gradually, it got bigger and bigger. Bang, bang, bang. It is no longer the old age. Many superstitions have gradually become clear under scientific research. For example, the study of the spirit body. The basic materials distributed by Fatty Huo and his department contained a lot of introductions to spiritual bodies, including Chen Xian's understanding of spiritual bodies from these materials. The spirit body is the highest manifestation of the convergence of the spiritual energy and consciousness of a creature. Their abilities are also related to their own magnetic field, and the strong magnetic field is strong. The heavier the yin particles in the air, the stronger the magnetic field of the spirit body. This is a common sense recognized by strangers. It was late at night. It was a moment when the yin qi in religious studies increased sharply, and when it rained heavily, it could be regarded as the Taoist so-called overcast sky. Therefore, it is not surprising that these newly dead spirit bodies can appear in front of Chen Xian and the others in such a real state. These should be patients in a mental hospital, right? Chen Xian asked casually. Looking around, these spirit bodies were naked and unclothed, so he didn't dare to determine the identity of these spirit bodies. It's possible. Huo Fati replied, speaking very carefully, lowering his voice, for fear of attracting the attention of these spirits. I have read the information of this hospital. There are hundreds of patients, and there are only dozens of doctors and nurses. There are at least hundreds of spirit bodies here, right? Maybe more. Chen Xian shook his head. The corridor burned by the fire was dark and deep. Those people who shouldn't exist all came to the first floor of the mental hospital, facing Chen Xian and the others in the corridor, constantly hitting the wall with their heads. This was originally a confined space. If you speak a little louder, the echo will become louder, so at this time, Chen Xian and the others could only hear the sound of banging against the wall. The heads that were burnt to black, the sound of hitting the wall was dull and full of a sense of rhythm, which seemed to make people inexplicably immersed in it. Fatty Huo only listened for a while, and his eyes became apathetic, as if he had lost the ability to control and autonomy, and his body slowly swayed from side to side following the sound of hitting the wall. Chen Xian glanced at him, and stretched out his hand to pinch among others. The intense pain made Huo Fatty come back to his senses, as if he hadn't realized what had happened before. Covering his mouth and glaring at Chen Xian, "What are you doing? Do you want to hit the wall too?" Chen Xian looked at him amused. Fatty Huo was stunned for a second, as if thinking of his previous abnormality. He was startled in a cold sweat. "These spirits are not hostile to us, there is no need to do anything with them." Chen Xian whispered, patted Huo Fatty's arm lightly, and motioned for him to release the gun and stop messing around. They are dead people with resentment in their hearts. If they are not stimulated, they may be able to calm down. If we make a lot of movement, things will become very troublesome. Fatty Huo let go of his right hand holding the pistol, and felt that he was indeed a bit gaff. It was just some spirit body. It turned out that he hadn't seen it before. What's the point of nervousness? What should I do now? Huo Fatty asked. Hold your breath and follow me. Be careful not to touch them. After Chen Xian said this, he held his breath and carefully led Huo Fatty to the depths of the corridor. The corridor was originally narrow, and the left and right sides were standing with their backs facing Chen Xian and their patients, so they could only walk through the narrow gap in the middle, and they had to pay attention to the posture they walked by, and ensure that they would not touch them as much as possible. Patient. Under the light of Fatty Huo's flashlight, the deep corridor was still depressing to breathe, like a dark tunnel that could not be seen at a glance. The two of them dared not make a sound, and even the sound of walking was suppressed to the lowest level. For a while, only the sound of the patient hitting the wall was left in the deep and dull corridor. Boom! 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 Each patient was naked, his skin was burnt black, and some parts and even the skin was cracked. The cracks were slightly curled like fried fish fillets, exposing the cooked muscle tissue under the skin. The smell of roasted meat was quite fragrant at first, but it gradually became nauseous. The smell was mixed with an indescribable greasy and rancid smell. The smell of human fat cooked at high temperature was almost like a deteriorating lard that has been exposed to the sun. Although it was embarrassing to say it, Fatty Huo really wanted to vomit. Time flies extremely slowly at this time, and every second passing by becomes extremely clear. When the two of them completely passed through this hell-like corridor, about 3 minutes had passed. In the middle, Chen Xian and Huo Fati held their breath, and they didn't dare to resume breathing until they walked out of the patient's pile. How do I need to search? Chen Xian asked, looking back at the scorched patients, with a smile on his fair face. There are a lot of wards here. If you need a carpet search, you may have to live until the next day. Morning. Don't be so troublesome, just go to the dean's room and have a look. Fatty Huo said, pointing to the corner ahead. I have seen the floor plan of this hospital. The dean's room is just behind the corner on the first floor. During the interrogation of Hong Jingxi, Fatty Huo got the general information. The structure of the psychiatric hospital building is in a back shape. The 4 sides are the inpatient department, the medical department, and other medical rooms. In the middle is a huge empty patio space. There is a small independent building. Hong Jingxi and the others were planted there. According to Hong Jingxi, the batch of gold bricks purchased by the mental hospital was also transported into the house. What exactly is there? Fatty Huo wanted to know this answer, because in his opinion, the most elusive place in the entire hospital was the small independent building in the courtyard. What the building is for, Fatty Huo can't guess, but it's so secretive, there must be something incredible in it. Okay, then we will go to the dean's room now. Chen Xian said, continuing to open the way in front of Huo Fati. The corridors of this mental hospital looked very unlucky. Although the description was a bit abstract, it gave Chen Xian the feeling that it was like this, and every corner exuded an unclear atmosphere. Walls, ceilings, floors. Under the scorched black traces, there was another color of blood, dark red and deep. Is blood? It does not seem. They are darker and duller than blood. Xiao Chen, do you feel something is wrong? Have. After receiving Chen Xian's answer, Huo Fati raised his hand and scratched his arm a few times, his expression uncomfortable. Why do I feel a little flustered in my heart? Huo Fati murmured. Your sixth sense is quite accurate. Chen Xian grinned, and a dignified look flashed across his delicate face. Perhaps because of his identity as a foreigner, Chen Xian's perception is much stronger than that of ordinary people, especially when some dangers are still unknown, he can mostly sense them in advance. This is a biological instinct, a beast-like intuition. At this moment, he already felt the danger, and this feeling of danger came from the corridor behind the corner in front. Be careful, Chen Xian said. In the next second, he took Huo Fati over the corner and came to the corridor where the dean's room was located. When he saw this corridor, Chen Xian couldn't help frowning, and Fatty Huo lost his voice in surprise. What's going on? Fatty Huo asked with wide-eyed eyes. This corridor is horribly clean. The porcelain white translucent floor tiles were spotless, and the whitewashed walls were as white as snow, and there was no trace of fire. Isn't this fire burning here? Xiao Chen, what's going on? Huo Fati asked. Chen Xian looked carefully for a while, then shook his head and said that he didn't know. This was the first time he had encountered this situation. The intensity of the fire before is obvious to all. It should be impossible to say that it hasn't been burned here, but this corridor does not show signs of being burned, but it seems that it has just been carefully cleaned. Could it be? Suddenly, Chen Xian thought of a possibility. But he looked around carefully, but he felt unsure again. Maybe I think too much. Chen Xian murmured. In the middle of the corridor, there is an extremely conspicuous door, which is very different from the doors of other rooms, which reveals a sense of superiority. That should be the dean's room. Little Chen, let's go and take a look. It was a brand new mahogany door, which seemed to have just been installed, and one could even smell the undissipated paint on it. Fatty Huo looked eager to try, he just wanted to quickly open the door and take a look, maybe he could find the key in the dean's room. But compared with him, Chen Xian's expression is not so good looking, even he is a bit depressed. The closer you are to this door, the stronger the premonition of danger. Maybe the key is here, if they haven't transferred. Fatty Huo muttered to himself with excitement, raised his hand and held the doorknob. Just as he was about to push the door hard, Chen Xian suddenly reached out and stopped him. Don't open the door. Hearing Chen Xian's unrestrained remarks, Fatty Huo shivered subconsciously, hurriedly let go of the doorknob, turned his face to look at Chen Xian and asked, "What's wrong? Is there something?" "There is a voice," Chen Xian whispered. Fatty Huo hurriedly calmed down, put his ears up and listened carefully, wanting to hear what Chen Xian was talking about. But there is still silence in the corridor. It is no exaggeration to describe it as a needle drop. Where can there be other sounds? Could it be that you got it wrong? Huo Fatty asked. That's right, in there. When Chen Xian said this, he took a step forward and pressed his ear to the door. Inside, there was a sound of paper turning. It seems someone is writing in it. Chen Xian was familiar with the sound of the pen scratching across the paper. Someone, Chen Xian whispered. People. Fatty Huo frowned. Chen Xian thought for a while and said, not sure. I'll go in first, be careful. With that, Chen Xian held the door handle and twisted it slightly. Accompanied by a very crisp mechanical turning sound, the office door opened instantly. Fatty Huo drew out his pistol and stood on one side close to the wall waiting in a battle, leaving only Chen Xian standing outside the door. It's dark in the dean's room. The curtains were all drawn, there was no light, and no light source could be found. It can be said that the visibility inside is terribly low. Even if Fatty Huo took a bold look, he couldn't see anything. This office seemed to have been swallowed by darkness, and even Chen Xian felt uneasy with the weird atmosphere. Fatty Huo was about to wave his flashlight in, but he was stopped by Chen Xian as soon as he raised his hand. Don't use a flashlight, I can see it. Chen Xian's eyesight is relatively average, not much different from ordinary people, but he can see things in the dark, which is also one of the biggest differences between him and ordinary people. In his eyes, the visibility of this room is very low, but it is still not invisible. The dean's room was decorated very simply, and unexpectedly narrow and cramped, not as good as the wards I passed by before. About 10 square meters. There is only a desk, a leather chair, and no other furniture. On that only chair, there was a weird sitting. This is also the reason why Chen Xian didn't dare to let Fatty Huo turn on the lamp, for fear that he would be disturbed. The naked man was as thin as wood, with a skinny body, just like a skeleton covered in skin. There was no fat at all, and the eye sockets were deeply sunken. The light here is too dim, even if Chen Xian can look at something in the dark, he still can't tell the color of his skin. At this moment, it clutched a pen with its fingers like dead branches, and kept writing something in a notebook. Doesn't seem to be a spirit body? Chen Xian looked at the strange man with some curiosity, and planned to take a closer look and observe. Without waiting for Fatty Huo to say anything, Chen Xian took a step forward and crossed the threshold into the dean's room. The moment he walked into this room, he didn't notice it. The office door behind disappeared. From the moment he stepped into the dean's room, the door seemed to have been swallowed by a dark whale, disappearing without a trace from this room, and Fatty Huo standing outside the door was also panicked at this moment. What about people? Fatty Huo rushed to the door, and did not hesitate to use a bright flashlight to shine in it. Only then did he discover how weird this office was. Any light will be sucked away by it, or swallowed by it. When the flashlight passed, it was like it was shining on a black wall that would reflect light. Nothing can be seen except black or black. How did this happen? Fatty Huo frowned. He didn't expect that things would develop into the way it is now. What is going on here? In all fairness, Fatty Huo is not the kind of ignorant investigator. Before he became a small leader, he had seen countless strange cases. What kind of monster he hadn't seen? But this time, he opened his eyes. The dean's office seemed to be torn apart from the real world and turned into an independent space. Fatty Huo boldly stretched his hand inward a few times, and the touch was very strange. It seemed that the palm of his hand was not in the air, but in a pool of cold and viscous water. The sticky, greasy but icy feeling made Fatty Huo more and more bottomless. The spirit body is really capable of doing this? Or does it mean that this is not the cause of the spirit body at all? Xiao Chen, can you hear my voice? Fatty Huo ignored the danger here, and yelled into the office a few times, the expression on his face becoming more and more nervous. Xiao Chen, are you okay? Xiao Chen. Different from Huo Fatty's panic, Chen Xian behaved very calmly when he discovered that the door of the dean's room had disappeared. Chen Xian seemed to be accustomed to this kind of situation. He just walked a few steps back and looked for it carefully, and he was sure that he could not find the location of the door. Only a glimmer of enlightenment flashed in his eyes. No wonder the corridor outside the door is as clean as new, and there is no trace of the fire. It turned out to be like this. Unexpectedly, the spirit body here is so powerful, it has produced such a powerful domain. Chen Xian looked around and couldn't help but wonder. In the old legends, there is often a saying that ghosts hit the wall. It said that there are unclean things and charming eyes, which causes people to lose their sense of direction. Address. Facts have proved that this situation does exist, but in modern times, it should be called a domain. The most elementary domain is the common ghost hitting the wall in the legend, which can make people lose their sense of direction, but it is not absolutely perfect, and there are ways to go out. As for high-level domains, such as this one. In fact, from the very beginning, Chen Xian and the others walked into the domain created by the spirit body, and the corridor outside where no trace of the fire could be found was part of the domain. In short, domain is not necessarily a fictional picture. The more powerful the spirit body, the higher the Taoism, the more real the domain they can create, and can even achieve the effect of constructing another kind of reality. The coverage area is very wide. Chen Xian estimated the area of the previous corridor in his heart, and couldn't help but be amazed. It was the first time he had encountered such a large-scale domain. With emotion, Chen Xian also averted his gaze and looked forward. The creature sitting at the desk writing is very much like a human being, and it's a living one. The chest cavity will rise and fall with breathing, and the pulse can be vaguely seen under the dry skin. However, no matter how much it looks like a human being, Chen Xian can smell the lifelessness on it. It is definitely a spirit body, but compared with the spirit body I have seen before, it seems to be more active. That's right, it's like a person who is still alive, and that feeling is hard to describe in words. Looking at the thin and shriveled figure, Chen Xian thought silently for a while, then raised his foot and walked over slowly, with the same calm expression on his face, as if he had become accustomed to this kind of picture. Before that, the words Chen Xian said to Huo Fatty were not perfunctory, he was indeed not a religious practitioner, and he did not understand the so-called onmyosis at all. So when encountering this situation, Chen Xian had only one way to break the domain. Remove the spirit body that created the domain, and the real domain will be wiped out. Can you hear me? Chen Xian walked to the side of the weird man, stretched out his hand and shook it in front of it, moving casually and lightly, as if he was not afraid that it would bite up. Rustle. The strange man didn't respond, and he was unmoved by Chen Xian's voice and body movements. He still held his shriveled and sunken head, holding a pen and frantically writing something on the notebook. For this situation, Chen Xian still has a headache. After all, he doesn't really like to work with spirit bodies and can communicate and solve things with words. There is no need to make it so complicated, but now it seems to be communicative. It's unlikely. What are you writing so attentively? Seeing the eccentric writing so fascinating, Chen Xian couldn't help but leaned over and took a look at the shabby notebook. It was densely packed with words. There are no gaps between each word, it looks very depressing, and the full content is only 4 words. These are 4 words that keep repeating. She's out. The handwriting on the record book is rather scribbled, and you can even see the panic of the writer between the lines, the kind of fear conveyed through the font, which Chen Xian has never encountered before. She came out, she came out. Chen Xian looked at these 4 words constantly appearing on the paper, only feeling confused. She came out? Who is she? Could it be another spirit body? Chen Xian was thinking about this when the strange man in front of him suddenly stopped. It stopped writing, but looked down at the line of writing on the notebook, and laughed strangely. He he he. Its laughter was intermittent, like a lunatic to the extreme, with very loud fluctuations in tones. The hoarse and distorted voice continued to radiate through the shriveled throat like dead branches, and the body trembled, as if he couldn't help but laugh, and his shoulders kept trembling. Can you hear me? Chen Xian made sure again, bent down slightly, and shook his hand in front of it. This time, Chen Xian got a different response. I saw that the shriveled weird raised his arm without warning, and directly pierced Chen Xian's palm with the pen he had used to write before. The whole process took an instant, and even Chen Xian couldn't react to it. He he. The shriveled weird still smiled, his skinny hand holding a pen, his twisted and sunken face was covered with crazy smiles. The pen was like a huge nail, firmly nailed to Chen Xian's palm, the skin at the wound was also sunken, and the smelly blood flowed out from the edge of the gap in an instant. Feeling the piercing pain, Chen Xian almost instinctively raised his arm, and slammed an elbow across the face of this shriveled stranger. Bang! After being hit by an elbow, the strange man let out an extremely miserable howl. The whole body flew out uncontrollably, but it suddenly grasped the balance in midair, like a skinny wild cat with all 4s on the ground. Landed not far away. Chen Xian glanced at the weird man who was staring at him, then looked down at the wound on his palm, showing no expression on his face. He could feel the pain, but he was unexpectedly not afraid of it. That biting pain is a torture to ordinary people, but in his eyes, maybe it's really nothing. Hold the pen and yank it sharply. Chen Xian expressionlessly pulled the pen body out of his palm, and the torn skin also turned over, embarrassedly resting on the hole left by the pen. The whole wound looked extremely bloody. Appalling! At this time, the strange man lying not far away could not bear it and let out a howl like a wild beast. Instead of standing up, it started running on all 4s and rushed straight to Chen Xian. Its speed was so fast that there was only a shadow left, and it ran in front of Chen Xian almost instantly, rushing on him with teeth and claws, seeming to want to bite his neck in one bite. But it couldn't think of it, Chen Xian's movements were faster than it. Chen Xian did not evade, but stepped forward, grabbing the strange man's arm with his right hand first, and flicking it sideways to reward him with a shoulder fall. When the shriveled weird landed, Chen Xian took advantage of the victory and directly stepped on its neck with his foot. If the behavior of this strange man before was like a beast, then Chen Xian was not much better. Chen Xian slowly opened his mouth amidst the screams of the strange man, revealing 2 rows of bright white teeth. Without waiting for the strange man to resist, he bit down according to its wildly waving arm. From the naked eye, the body of this weird person is very real, just like a living person. But after being bitten by Chen Xian, the lump of meat directly broke away from its physical state, and turned into a lump of green smoke, which was swallowed into his stomach. From a scientific point of view, the spirit body is a kind of life in an abnormal state, and it is also an aggregate of unconventional material energy. In the energy that they construct the body, 10% of the material is temporarily unknown, the remaining 90% are yin-qi particles. Yin-qi particles are harmful to people. If there are other strangers like Chen Xian who swallow part of the spiritual body directly into the abdomen, then it is no different from looking for death. From the yin-qi eroding the internal organs, from the yin-qi to the heart, he was killed on the spot. In the alien registration file of Huo Fati and his department, only Chen Xian could do such a feat as eating the spirit body. Temporary workers are numbered and coded, and Chen Xian's code is also derived from this. Alien eater. A person who can eat abnormal life. Boom. With this muffled noise, Chen Xian was kicked out abruptly by the weirdo, and he landed on the desk a few meters away impartially. Because of the sudden impact that was too strong, the slightly shoddy desk directly collapsed, and the sawdust was flying in all directions, and the objects on the desk were scattered all over the floor. To the effect. Chen Xian quickly got up from the ground, with obvious blood stains on the corners of his mouth, but he didn't care. He raised his hand and wiped it casually, then put his palm on his right rib and gently touched it a few times. There are obvious depressions in the ribs. A few ribs should have been broken. The severe pain made it difficult for him to breathe, but the expression on his face was still terribly calm, as if the injured was not someone else, but just took a few deep breaths. Next, he stood up again. Who are you? Just when Chen Xian was about to step forward and continue to educate it, the shriveled weird suddenly opened his mouth. Although his voice was a bit vague, he could hear the content roughly. The voice is hoarse, like the sound of a damaged vocal cord, and the tone fluctuates very loudly. Why are you in my office? Hearing this ear-splitting roar, Chen Xian stopped and looked at it with a little surprise, recovered his sanity. From what it said, you can probably tell that this weird person is the director of the Wushan Mental Hospital. You are not from our hospital, who are you? The dean was still questioning angrily, pressing on every step of the way, and started to move closer to Chen Xian. But slowly, it realized a certain point. Am I dead? The dean's footsteps stopped for a while, and it seemed that he had only noticed the changes in his body. There were a few more wrinkles on his face that was as thin as old bark. It lowered its head and kept looking at its body, and its tone became more and more alarmed. Yes, I remember, she came out, everyone is dead. When the dean said this, his body suddenly trembled, and a humane expression appeared on his face that was already scary and dented. Fear. Who is out? Chen Xian asked subconsciously. He was more concerned about this matter. From the brief information revealed by the dean, Chen Xian can roughly know that the changes in the hospital, including the fire, may be all related to her. But who is she? Patient 13, she came out, no. I want to hide. The dean has lost his mind, just like a real mental patient. After being gnawed off by Chen Xian, he hugged his head with only his left hand, screamed madly, and turned around and ran into a dark corner. Go with. When Chen Xian reacted to catch up, the dean had disappeared. For the spirit body, it is not difficult to pass through the wall, not to mention that this is the domain it created. In this space surrounded by ghosts hitting the wall, as long as it wants to escape, Chen Xian may not be able to stop it. Somehow, make your words clear before leaving. Chen Xian stopped very depressed, and then he also noticed the changes in the dean's room. The darkness around him was gradually disappearing, and the door that had been covered by darkness before quietly recovered. Xiao Chen. Are you okay? Can you hear my voice? Hearing the sound coming from behind, Chen Xian frowned and didn't turn around. Instead, he put his previously injured right hand in his pocket calmly. He didn't want Fatty Huo to discover the wound on his hand. Chen Xian raised his hand and touched his ribs. He could feel that the bones were moving, and the sunken ribs were bulging again, and it would not take long for them to recover. Xiao Chen, are you okay? Fatty Huo had already ran into the office in strides, standing beside Chen Xian as if he was facing a big enemy, holding a flashlight and constantly scanning left and right, for fear that there was still a hidden danger here. I'm fine. Chen Xian smiled, still with that kind smile on his face. His right hand in his pocket didn't move, and his body stood up straight, making it impossible to see the abnormality of his ribs. I met the dean just now, but it ran too fast and couldn't catch it. Sorry, Uncle Huo. Have you met the dean? What about the others? Where did you go? Fatty Huo asked excitedly, looking around in the dean's room with a flashlight, trying to find the figure that is extremely important to him. The dean must be the leader of this mental hospital, and it is impossible for him to know the whereabouts of the key, so as long as he catches him, everything will be done logically. Run through the wall. Chen Xian kept one hand in his pocket, raised the other hand, and pointed to the direction where the dean had disappeared before. His tone of voice was somewhat helpless. In fact, this area is full of the ghost it made hit the wall, and we were fooled by it from the beginning. With that, Chen Xian took Huo Fatty out of the office and into the corridor before. The scenery of this corridor has changed, or in other words, this is what it really looks like. The walls are full of traces of being burned by the fire, and the white and brand new walls before, are only blackened by the fire at this moment, revealing an unpleasant and pungent burnt smell. I thought something was wrong before, I also thought about whether this is a domain, but everything looks too real, I was fooled by it. Standing in the corner of the wall, Chen Xian gently wiped the blackened marks on the wall with his hands. He has seen many spirit bodies over the years, but most of the domains created by spirit bodies have loopholes, and it is easy to get rid of them without too much effort. But the domain created by the dean is terrifyingly real. Before entering the office, he can't notice or see any loopholes. The domain can be made so real, the dean is really so strong. Chen Xian was thinking about it in his heart, feeling a little out of it. Judging from the close encounters, the dean is quite strong, which is the truth. Before meeting the dean, Chen Xian had the strongest and most agile opponent in the eyes of the corpse he met in the Ningchuan funeral home half a year ago. In Taoist terms, the monster that had a corpse should be called Ju Xiai. The dead in vain are buried in the dark eyes, the filth gathers in the spirit platform without dispersing, the 3 souls fly into one, the fetal light is hidden in the 7 souls, the corpse is turned into a haunted by the air, there are 2 souls and 7 souls, which is thought to be 9 corpses. 9 corpse 9 is a monster that is extremely difficult to deal with, at least in Chen Xian's eyes. As long as its valve is not broken, this thing is similar to a perpetual motion machine. Moreover, the corpse qi on its body is extremely corrosive, not to mention the flesh of a living person, even ordinary metal objects will be corroded by this corpse qi very quickly. This is also one of the most difficult reasons to deal with the 9 corpses. The spirit body that the dean turned into after his death is not weaker than Ju Xiai, but it does not have the extremely corrosive corpse qi of Ju Xiai, but is better at creating domains. This corridor was previously covered by a domain created by the dean. Except for the office, the area here is at least 300 to 400 square meters. The ability to expand the domain to 300 or 400 squares, and also to control every detail, so that senior strangers like Chen Xian can see it away, showing how exaggerated the dean's ability to construct the domain is. This ability seems like a tasteless one, and it is difficult to cause substantial harm to people, but in Chen Xian's eyes, this ability is the most troublesome for him. He is not afraid of fighting Hedon, but he is afraid that it will take a lot of work to find the righteous when encountering such a troublesome situation. Have you had contact with the dean before? Fatty Huo wanted to find a breakthrough from Chen Xian. After all, the dean became a spirit body after his death, and only Chen Xian knew it best. Right. Chen Xian nodded. Fatty Huo asked cautiously, did he say anything? Some interesting words. Chen Xian grinned, with a slightly green face, a little curiosity that could not be concealed. The reason why the mental hospital caught fire, and the reason why they died, seems to be because of a mental patient. Speaking of this, Chen Xian is also a little interested. How terrible is the patient that scares the dean like that? Even if the dean was dead and turned into a spirit body, he would still be so scared. Chen Xian was really curious, because he had never encountered such a situation. I don't recommend continuing the survey work. Even if you want to continue, I can't take you with you. When Chen Xian said this, his expression was rarely serious, and he was helpless with the current situation. This mental hospital is more troublesome than I thought. You have seen the domain created by the Dean before. At this point, Chen Xian sighed. If it separates me from you again, at that time, I can't guarantee your safety. If you meet other spirit bodies, the possibility of death is very high. Fatty Huo didn't dare to take Chen Xian's remarks lightly. After all, everything he had seen before was evidence. Not to mention the Dean, the hundreds of spirit bodies that he had met before were enough to deter him. If there is no protection from Chen Xian, how can the risk be low when entering the target area for search and survey in this extreme situation? After thinking for a while, Huo Fatty said nonchalantly, "If I can, I want to continue searching the scene until I find the key." Is the key so important? Chen Xian couldn't help asking, and he was full of doubts. It was just a cultural relic. Is it necessary to find it at this time? The key is a cultural relic that the superiors called and retrieved. Before, Lao Zhou also sent a message to me about the seriousness of the incident. If the key cannot be found in time, let alone me, it is the other people who participated in the case. The people who have had to be held accountable. Your superiors are quite unreasonable. Chen Xian frowned. Being reasonable is not a superior. Huo Fatty sighed. After all, Fatty Huo lighted a cigarette a little heavy, with a gloomy expression on his face. Since everyone has died in this fire, it is very likely that the key is still in this mental hospital and has not been transferred by them. As Fatty Huo said, there was a hint of worry in his eyes, but that key is very fragile. After all, it is an ancient cultural relic. It is incomparable with our modern keys. It will bend under a little force. If the force is larger, it will be broken and scrapped. Risk. At this time, Fatty Huo went silent, smoking a cigarette without saying a word. That's what you want to find the key? Chen Xian asked. Even if I don't want to, the superior thinks it means I think. Huo Fatty smiled bitterly. Sometimes we have to listen to the above words. If we don't follow the rules, who knows what they will do with us? After all, the internal changes in the past few years are more complicated. Chen Xian took a deep look at Fatty Huo, and suddenly smiled. Okay, let's keep looking. Hearing Chen Xian's words very simply, Huo Fatty couldn't help being stunned for a moment. Are you not afraid that this mission is risky? Huo Fatty couldn't help asking, thinking for a while, but decided to say what was in his heart, with a particularly ashamed expression. The nature of this case is more complicated. If you don't protect it, if you cause me to die or encounter other accidents, you will also be held accountable, you can think about it. As soon as he finished speaking, Fatty Huo took a cigarette fiercely, as if he had made some decision. The look in Chen Xian's eyes became complicated. Or let's withdraw it, and wait until the follow-up support comes to carry out the search work. After all, you are innocent. If I get involved in an accident, it's not worth it. Hearing these words, Chen Xian just smiled and said nothing. He lowered his head, pulled out the right hand that had been in the pocket of his trousers, and glanced silently, confirming that the wound that had been pierced by the pen had disappeared, and then looked away. Uncle Huo, I am not helping you free. If I can you satisfy my curiosity? Chen Xian touched the ribs that had been restored to their original shape, and there was a hint of interest in his smile. Taking advantage of this opportunity to show favor to Huo Fatty, he asked the question that he had always wanted to answer. That key shouldn't be as simple as an ancient cultural relic? I don't believe it to let you come and kill you for an ancient cultural relic. Hearing this, Huo Fatty couldn't help turning his face, looking at Chen Xian with a vigilant look. What are you asking this for? Pure curiosity. A smile appeared on Chen Xian's green face. He subconsciously touched his nose, and looked at Fatty Huo with a little embarrassment. Seeing that he was a little embarrassed, he took the initiative to say. I won't say it if it's inconvenient, I'm just curious, and I don't mean anything else. Hearing this, Huo took a cigarette, examined Chen Xian carefully for a while, and finally looked away. That is a master key. You know Ma Wangdui tombs, right? After lighting a cigarette again, Fatty Huo began to talk to Chen Xian about the key, and at the same time they returned to the dean's room again, looking for the next way in this burnt-to-ruin vacant house. The secret corridor mentioned by Hong Jingxi. Ma Wangdui in Changsha. Chen Xian thought for a while, and asked, isn't it the tomb group that was unearthed with no decayed female corpses? Fatty Huo nodded, wandering around the room, and continued to talk to Chen Xian. In 1972, 5 keys were unearthed in Ma Wangdui. From a certain perspective, they are beyond the modern concept of ancient cultural relics and are more like a high-tech product. Hearing this, Chen Xian's interest suddenly grew again, and his eyes became more and more curious. How high-tech? You'll know when you listen. After the 5 keys were unearthed that year, the superiors quickly took it seriously and put in strict protection measures, requiring all departments to cooperate fully and sending these 5 keys to the capital headquarters as quickly as possible. But no one expected that under such strict protection, there would be accidents. No one had access to the safe for storing the keys on the road. There were dozens of armed personnel guarding them. 8 surveillance video cameras that were turned on 24 hours a day were installed on the top, bottom, left, and right to ensure the safety of the 5 keys. It can be said that in that era, being able to be protected like this was already considered the ultimate. But when the transport vehicle arrived at the headquarters research institute, the experts opened the box to take a look. Only 4 of the 5 keys remain, and one of the keys has disappeared. No one knows where the key went or how it was lost. Huo Fatty said here, as if thinking of the chaos that year, he couldn't help but shook his head. Our department is also in chaos. We started a thorough investigation, first checking the people inside us, and then checking other people, but in the end we didn't find any clues. It wasn't until the surveillance video of Hong Jingxi's theft of Lin's vault was exposed in the late 1990s that we found that the key was on his body. He stole the key back then? Chen Xian asked curiously. It should be not. Time is not right. Fatty Huo shook his head and said, we also wonder why the key is in his hand, but now that Hong Jingxi is dead, this clue is broken. After that, Fatty Huo took a cigarette and continued talking with a subtle expression. After expert appraisal, these keys are not related to the Ma Wangdui Han tomb, and are not products of the Han dynasty. They can be traced back to a long time, even surpassing the Xia dynasty BC, and the engraved fonts on the keys are also unseen. It's more complicated and harder to interpret than oracle. Chen Xian listened with enthusiasm and motioned for Fatty Huo to continue talking. Of course, even ancient objects are considered cultural relics. The reason why I say that they are beyond the modern concept of cultural relics is because of their characteristics. What are the characteristics? Chen Xian asked. A strange look flashed in Fat Huo's eyes, his tone became a little complicated, and he replied in a low voice. Unlock. Yes, the most unbelievable ability of these ancient keys is unlocking. Electronic, mechanical, digital, password. No matter what kind of lock, these ancient keys can be opened, and the way of unlocking the lock is weird, beyond ordinary people can imagine. Those keys seem to be smarter and can recognize all locks. As long as they lean against the unlocking position, a lot of powder will flow out of the top to forcibly penetrate the inside of the lock. The color looks like lead powder. Fatty Huo had seen the other 4 keys, so when he said these words, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. The powder that flows out of the key is relatively coarse at first, and the powder behind is very fine, but in the end it is directly invisible, at least invisible to the naked eye. So, is the key unlocked by those powders? Chen Xian asked thoughtfully. Yes. Fatty Huo nodded. Any kind of lock can be opened. This is a master key. Chen Xian smiled, and he probably understood a little bit of his superior's eagerness to find the key. Not to mention how useful they would be after taking the key back, it can be seen from Hong Jingxi that they couldn't bear the consequences of letting the key go to the people. Who has this key and has a sense of anti-reconnaissance, wouldn't it become a thief? I've said everything that should or shouldn't be said, your mouth can be more serious, don't talk nonsense, things about the key are considered confidential in our department, and it will be troublesome to say it. Huo Fatty warned. I know. Chen Xian nodded with a smile. After satisfying Chen Xian's curiosity, Huo Fatty slowly became anxious. Because I wandered around in the dean's room more than a dozen times, I still couldn't find the entrance of that secret corridor. Fatty Huo was smoking a cigarette, his brain was running fast, recalling the scenes of interrogating Hong Jingxi. Didn't he say that there is a corridor here? Why can't I find it? Could it be that he lied to me? This year has to be found. Fatty Huo was a little anxious. He pinched out the cigarette in his hand and threw it on the ground. I don't believe it. Are you sure there is a corridor here? Chen Xian asked. Huo Fatty told him about the corridor before, but he couldn't find it after searching for a long time, and Chen Xian also felt a headache. That's what Hong Jingxi said anyway. Fatty Huo frowned, his expression very distressed. Chen Xian nodded, and silently began to walk next to the corner, tapping on the wall with his hands as he walked. According to the architectural construction of the mental hospital, it should be a conventional frame structure. Except for some non-load-bearing walls, the rest of the walls should be solid concrete walls. The dean's room is close to the inside of the corridor. The non-load-bearing walls on the left and right sides make the percussion sound more clear, while the sound feedback from the front and back walls is much dull. Under Chen Xian's patient percussion, he gradually heard a different voice. Boom! This sound was extremely crisp. There was a little echo, but it was hollow inside. Is it in the wall? Chen Xian looked at the wall with some doubts. Huo Fatty also hurried over and knocked on the wall a few times with his hands. Here, it should be correct. Fatty Huo was also relieved, a rare smile appeared on his heavy face, and he pushed the golden glasses on the bridge of his nose. Hong Jingxi said that the corridor is behind the dean's room. This position is facing the door of the dean's room. If you can match the number, let's, Fatty Huo was taken aback for a moment, looked at Chen Xian who was doing leg presses, and asked confusedly, what are you doing? Open the door, we can't go through the wall, right? Chen Xian smiled, continued to press his leg a few times, and then slowly stood up. Chen Xian was still very confident of his strength. In his opinion, kicking such a hollow wall was nothing at all. Rather than gouge the wall with tools, he might as well just kick it. Before Fatty Huo had time to stop him, Chen Xian had already jumped up, and if he kicked on the wall with great force, he made a loud bang. In an instant, the wall dented. Judging from the big hole that Chen Xian kicked out, it was indeed hollow inside. It's inside. We really didn't find it wrong. Fatty Huo was relieved when he saw the metal door frame inside through the gap of the pit. It seems that Hong Jingxi didn't lie. This is indeed the entrance of that corridor. As long as you pass through this metal door and then go through the corridor behind the door, you will finally reach the most secret patio space. The corridor you are talking about is behind this door. Chen Xian asked. Yes, you'll see it when you open the door. Fatty Huo said. He leaned forward to the hole in the wall again and looked inside carefully. The outer wall is only as thin as bricks, no wonder Chen Xian can kick it through, and the inner door is nearly 20 centimeters away from the wall. Why did they hide this door in the wall? Is it possible that every time I go in, I have to gouge the wall open? Don't they find it troublesome? When Fatty Huo thought of this, he was even more puzzled, but at this moment, he heard a strange sound. The sound is very noisy, and the voice is heavy, coming from that door. It sounds like some kind of gasping sound, and judging from the sound, more than one person was panting. The mental hospital is a back-shaped building. According to Hong Jingxi, the patio space in the center of this building is completely independent. The surrounding walls are all in a closed state, and the only exit to the outside world is this secret corridor hidden in the dean's room. The fire started outside. Although the fire is strong, it should only burn on the outer layer of the word Hui. Is that possible? The independent space at the end of the corridor happened to be avoided. This fire? If this hypothesis is true, then there is a high probability that there are still living people in this mental hospital. Because there was a small building in that independent space, according to Hong Jingxi, the batch of gold bricks purchased by the hospital was sent to the small room. Be careful. Suddenly, Fatty Huo recovered from Chen Xian's voice. Without waiting for him to say anything, Chen Xian stretched out his hand to drag him, abruptly dragging him behind him, and keeping him away from the strange door. Chen Xian's nose has always been very good, and it was no exception at this time. After being straightened by Huo Fatty, he leaned toward the door a little bit, and instantly he could smell the smell of corpses coming from the door. That's right, it's the smell of corpses. It smelled like a corpse that was seriously decomposed in a sultry environment, and the foul smell was mixed with a fishy smell like lard. 11, 12. Chen Xian stuck his head into the hole in the wall, muttering to himself calmly. His eyes became strange. 44, there are 44 distinguishable voices. Hearing what Chen Xian said, Huo Fatty couldn't help feeling a little surprised. Although the gasp behind the door was heavy and sounded noisy, it was definitely not a person who could make it. But, how did he hear that there are 44 people? And looking at what he meant, there seemed to be more than 44 people in the door, but 44 different voices could be temporarily identified. You go back first, I'll open the door and have a look. While talking, Chen Xian kicked the wall fiercely with his feet, knocking down the remaining empty shell wall as quickly as possible, and the door in the wall was quickly exposed. It is a metal door with a round handle that can be twisted, but there is a password electronic board above the handle, there are many buttons on it, and it looks like there is a small black frame for fingerprint authentication. Seeing that this door had so many high-end configurations, Chen Xian couldn't help turning his head, looked at each other with Huo Fatty for a while, and then fell silent. Damn it! How do you get in this special? No wonder Hong Jingxi uses the key to open this door. Without the key, who can unlock the password lock and fingerprint lock? Should we withdraw? Chen Xian asked tentatively. You go back and call for support. When the people from the Armed Forces Department arrive, you can just blast the door open with explosives. Fatty Huo gave Chen Xian a blank look, and said angrily, until the key is found, the search work here cannot use destructive means. Chen Xian sighed helplessly, said nothing, can't use destructive methods? Then this is nonsense. He is good at cleaning up the spirit body, but when it comes to unlocking, he really can't do this. Looking at these complicated password keys, Chen Xian's brows became more frowning. The general code locks are digital types such as 1234, but how come there are all patterns on this keyboard? In other words, it is a pictograph with a similar pattern. Is it Oracle? But it doesn't look like it. Chen Xian frowned and stood outside the gate and looked at the mysterious password input board. He didn't know if it was tickling or he wanted to try it casually. He raised his hand and pressed it a few times. Sure enough, there was no response. There is no button sound, no feedback, nothing. Just when Chen Xian was at a loss, Fatty Huo suddenly stepped forward, seeming to have found something, and learning from Chen Xian, he pressed a few times on the password input board. No sound? Is it broken? Fatty Huo murmured, raised his hand and turned the doorknob, and only heard a click, the door opened a crack. This sudden change caused Fatty Huo to be stunned for a moment, and then looked at Chen Xian, only to feel that the surprise came so suddenly that he was a little caught off guard. The door is unlocked. Huo Fatty said in surprise. Just leave it locked, you follow me, be careful. Chen Xian stepped forward and took the doorknob from Fatty Huo. After Huo Fatty walked back holding the pistol, Chen Xian slowly opened the metal door. Behind the door is a deep and dark corridor, which is about 10 meters long and only 1 meter wide in a straight line. The ground was covered with grey retro bricks and scattered with many glass slags, each of which was the size of a soybean, and there were no clumps of sight. After opening the door, the panting sounds that Chen Xian and the others heard before gradually became louder and became clearer. It seems to be in the corridor. Chen Xian murmured, making sure that there was nothing dangerous in this corridor, so he took Huo Fatty into it cautiously. At the moment when he crossed the gate, Chen Xian shuddered, and so did Fatty Huo. "Did you feel anything?" Fatty Huo asked in a slight panic. "It seems to be a little cold suddenly." Chen Xian nodded and replied. Huo Fatty said hurriedly, "It's not this, I just felt that something passed by around me, like a person, coldly, and passed by. Why didn't I see it?" Chen Xian was taken aback. In the group of congenital aliens, Chen Xian is also considered to be the kind of person with extraordinary talents. A pair of eyes can't say that they can see yin and yang, but if you want to see the spirit body, there is definitely no problem. As long as the spirit body is not hiding in the wall, as long as they are in a position that can be seen at a glance, Chen Xian will definitely be able to see it. But when he was walking inside before, Chen Xian had already determined that there was really nothing here. "Is there a spirit body that I can't see?" Chen Xian was muttering in his heart, suddenly remembering the dean who had fought with him before. "It won't be pulled into the domain again." Chen Xian murmured softly, raised his head and sniffed the air a few times, then denied his guess. The domain created by the dean did not have too many loopholes, but it had a feature. Before falling into the dean's domain, Chen Xian did not notice this feature, but he remembered it afterwards. The only feature of the domain created by the spirit body that cannot be concealed is that the yin-qi particles exceed the standard. Although the domain constructed by the dean is perfect, and the smell of yin-qi has been concealed a lot, the air is somewhat floating in the air, and it can barely be smelled. I thought it all came from innocent patients who died in vain, but afterwards, I thought it was not. The other corridors didn't have the smell of yin air particles, only outside the dean's room. After carefully observing for a while, Chen Xian was sure that he couldn't feel the slightest yin, so he ruled out the possibility of the dean. This should be real, at least not an illusory scene constructed by the dean. "Be careful!" Chen Xian exhorted. Fatty Huo nodded silently, and clenched the gun in his hand. In this solemn atmosphere, Chen Xian led Huo Fatty out of the corridor slowly and came to the most secret place of the building, the independent space in the patio. Of course, this space is more like a wide circular square. The area is about the same size as a football field, and the ground is covered with glass slag. There are only 4 light sources here, in the 4 directions of southeast, northwest, and 4 orange oil lamps. They hung high on the wall, looking dim and depressed. The first time they walked out of the corridor, Chen Xian and Huo Fatty stopped, their faces full of surprises that could not be concealed. Not because this square was too shocking, but because the whole square was full of people. "I just said that the smell is different when I enter the hospital." Chen Xian looked at the crowded figures and felt a little hairy in his heart. This was the first time he saw so many corpses, and he would inevitably feel panicked. Doctors, nurses, staff, patients. Before the fire came, all the living people in this hospital should have knelt on this small square at this moment, and no one had fallen. Roughly speaking, there are at least 300 to 400 dead bodies here. "Yes, or let's get out first?" Fatty Huo asked cautiously. He spoke very softly, so he didn't dare to pant for fear of alarming the hundreds of dead ancestors. The gasps he and Chen Xian heard before were from these corpses. That's right, the dead man is gasping. Every time they breathe, their chest cavity and ribs will swell, and then slowly dent. Repeating this same action again and again. Are they going to get corpses? Chen Xian looked at the dead corpses suspiciously, with a slightly heavy expression. In this situation, Fatty Huo naturally knew the severity and did not dare to light them with a flashlight. With 4 oil lamps, he chose to turn off the flashlight and lowered the sound of his breathing, and carefully stood behind Chen Xian. Chen Xian didn't have any other actions, he was always observing by his ability to see things in secret. The overview of the entire square, the details of every corpse, he passed through his brain over and over again. There are many differences between these corpses. Age, appearance, gender, and even identity. But they also have one thing in common. The death state of each corpse is the same. He was thin and withered like a skeleton, as if the fat all over his body had been evaporated, and the skin was a strange dark grey with many conspicuous folds. On their backs, there is a wound that appears to have been artificially cut. The cut surfaces on both sides are neat and smooth. From the neck to the tail vertebra, a complete curve of the spine is exposed. Chen Xian was a little confused about everything he saw before him. Let's not talk about the doctors and nurses in work clothes, just talk about the patients. Didn't they get burned to death by the fire? Chen Xian and Fatty Huo had met their spirit bodies in the corridor before, and each one was scorched by the fire. Why can't they be seen from the corpse now? These corpses have no traces of being burned by the fire, what is going on? Can you see clearly? Fatty Huo asked suddenly. Yes. Chen Xian replied, his tone full of doubts, I don't understand the cause of their deaths. It looks like they were not burned to death by the fire, but as if they were killed by people. Artificial. Fatty Huo was taken aback. He didn't expect to hear this answer in Chen Xian's mouth. It's possible, Chen Xian said in a low voice, their death should be related to the wound on the back, and it seems a little bit wrong. Uncle Huo, lend me your flashlight. Hearing this, Fatty Huo handed the flashlight to Chen Xian without much thought. After turning on the flashlight, Chen Xian didn't dare to keep shining the lamp on the same target to observe, but kept shaking, carefully observing the wounds of these dead corpses with his excellent eyesight. No blood stains or excess body tissues can be seen. It seems that the internal organs have been artificially taken away. The only thing that can be seen is the spine. And the most conspicuous is the spine. Look at Uncle Huo. Chen Xian said, shaking the flashlight on the corpse closest to him, but in order to ensure that Fatty Huo could see it, the flashlight stayed longer than before. Fatty Huo followed the guide and looked over, only to see a golden thing in the wound behind the corpse. What is it? Huo Fatty asked suspiciously. Spine. Chen Xian whispered. Fatty Huo was stunned for 2 seconds and asked, Golden spine? Did you read it right? I can't read it wrong, although I can't determine if it's real gold, but I feel. Chen Xian nodded, the doubt in his eyes grew thicker, I seem to know where the gold bricks have gone. When Fatty Huo interrogated Hong Jingxi explained that Wushan Mental Hospital bought a batch of gold bricks. That was also the source of the whole case. It was the ton of gold bricks that aroused his greed, which led to this. Eventful. You mean the gold was used to spine them? Fatty Huo asked suspiciously. It's possible. Chen Xian said in a low voice, pointing his finger at the corpses in the front row. The doctors, nurses and staff, their deaths were almost the same as the patients, but they couldn't see the golden vertebrae. The death of those doctors and the patient is the same. Maybe they met the same thing, but they don't have this golden spine in their bodies. The bones are the most common color, so I think. Chen Xian frowned and analyzed carefully, maybe these bones have nothing to do with their death. Those golden bones may have another effect. Another role. Fatty Huo was taken aback for a moment, and hurriedly asked, what role? It's not clear yet. Chen Xian shook his head. The reason why the psychiatric hospital replaces patients with pure gold spine is definitely because there are some purposes. It is impossible to use banknotes to get rid of water without a purpose, but what they want to do. Chen Xian has not yet figured out this. Xiao Chen, they are kneeling like this, is there anything to say? Fatty Huo asked suddenly. In this square, every corpse kneeling on the ground bowed its head, facing the small house in the middle of the square, clasped hands as if praying religiously. The scene was weird to the extreme, and Fatty Huo became more and more hopeless the more he looked at it, and he felt terribly evil. In the sound of the corpse's breathing, Chen Xian looked into the middle of the square unmovedly, as if observing something, and did not answer Huo Fatty's words. There is a small house about 4 meters high in the middle of the square. It seems that there is only one floor, and there are no windows outside, only a black metal door. The direction in which these corpses bowed is towards the hut. What's in there? Chen Xian thought for a while before he said, "You wait for me here, I'll go over and take a look." "Are you going there alone?" Fatty Huo was a little worried. Chen Xian gave a hum, and said, "It's still uncertain whether these corpses are aggressive. It would be too risky to take you with you rashly. Be careful." Huo Fatty reminded. Chen Xian nodded, then walked forward slowly holding his breath. Regardless of whether the opponent is a spirit body or a corpse, if you want to not irritate them, it is best to hold your breath to ensure that the yang qi in your body does not leak out as much as possible. They are all anomalous beings with yin attributes, and they are extremely sensitive to yang particles. In some cases, let alone breathing, even if you inadvertently fart, there is a risk of irritating them. There are too many dead bodies here. To be honest, Chen Xian didn't want to do anything with them. It was not a joke to say that 2 fists are hard to beat 4 hands. 2 or 3 can be dealt with, how about 20 or 30? How about 2 or 300? The thought of these corpses being stimulated to attack the living, Chen Xian was a little shocked, and his mind was full of images of the zombies besieged in the movie. If these corpses are really large-scale corpses, Chen Xian's first choice is to take Huo Fatty out of here. This is also the only choice. Chen Xian might not die if he wanted to fight them, but Fatty Huo was 100% sure. Hey, hey. The breathing sounds in the entire square are very neat, and the regular tones are almost the same. The more you move forward, the louder the sound, and the atmosphere is becoming more and more depressing. Chen Xian walked among the corpses and gradually discovered many strange details. The golden vertebrae of these corpses are not concave and convex like real bones, but are smooth as mirrors on a large area, with many concave engraved spells. The style and structure of the charms are very similar to Taoist charms, but the content is too scribbled, and Chen Xian can't see what these charms are for. After all, he is not a Taoist priest and does not have a deep understanding of Fulo knowledge. Chen Xian was hesitating whether to go slower, and then he took a closer look at the spells. When he got closer, maybe he could find some clues. But at this moment, a bitter and painful howl suddenly spread from the small house in the middle of the square. "She wants to kill me! Help! Come and save me!" Not only Chen Xian could hear this sound, but also Fatty Huo, so Fatty Huo was taken aback for a moment, and his heart was full of surprise. Could it be that there are still living people in this place? At this time, Chen Xian was also very surprised, because he could tell that the voice was not from a living person at all, it was too familiar, that was the voice of the Dean. This miserable howl lasted only a few seconds, and soon quieted down, and the room remained silent from beginning to end. The closed door made it impossible to see what was inside. Chen Xian walked out of the group of corpses and stopped outside the hut very vigilantly. Looking at the unremarkable little house in front of him, Chen Xian fell into hesitation. "Do you want to go in and have a look?" Chen Xian looked back, a little worried, and left Fatty Huo alone outside. At this moment, a strange mechanical sound suddenly sounded in the room, as if there were many gears working with some mechanical device, and the sound of electric current could be faintly heard. Without waiting for Chen Xian to figure out the situation, the metal door of this hut opened to both sides like an automatic door, and there was no sound when the door was opened. Soon, a white and slender arm stretched out inside, gently tossing the residual body of the principal spirit body, and tossed it in front of Chen Xian like trash. Could it be, she is patient 13?